All right, everyone. Godova, Losud, Salfonga. That means good evening. Let us begin. So, wow, what a turnout. This is amazing. So, I think Mr. Biediger said it's like the field of dreams. You build it and they'll come. And, wow, they came. This is great. So, I'm just glad to see you all here. I think I know almost everyone in the room. For those of you whom I've not had the pleasure of meeting, my name's Mark Havey. And just so pleased to see you all here. And I'm going to tell you from the very get-go, I am not an expert. I'm not going to pretend to be something that I'm not. I'm looking out at this room, and I see at least 6 to 8 people that should be up here instead of me teaching this. But I'm going to tell you the backstory on how I kind of got picked to do this introduction and kind of teach part of this class. So in 2015, I traveled to Alsace for the first time. I'd been in touch with members of the Havey family. We arrive over in Alsace, and just beautiful, amazing. Everyone of Alsatian heritage needs to make that trip at some point. So we travel over there. We're meeting with the Havey family, and as we're talking to him, Francis Havey over there speaks fluent English, fluent Alsatian, fluent French, and his sisters, Anique and Monique, great people. They don't. They speak French and Alsatian. So they kind of asked me, they switched to Alsatian and stopped speaking French, hoping that we'd get the benefit of it. And they kind of asked me, how much Alsatian do you speak? And I did the universal sign for like, this much, And they said, a bitzala. I said, yeah, a bitzala, So I came home from that trip, and I was kind of embarrassed, and I felt bad. Here I am, Alsatian heritage. I was over in Alsace, and you've heard the saying, they can talk the talk, but can they walk the walk? Well, I was over there, I was walking the walk, seeing our ancestral home ground. I was meeting the Haveys. This was great, but I couldn't talk the talk. So I said, you know what, this has got to change. So I came home, I told my parents, I was embarrassed over there. I couldn't understand anything, I couldn't speak anything. Stop speaking English to me. Speak Alsatian to me. My grandma Biediger was still alive at that time. I said, we called her Mamu. Mamu, stop speaking English to me. Speak Alsatian to me. And they did, but Les and Patsy were very gracious. I asked them, they responded, they came out to the man cave. We put together, 10, 12 people, I think it was. And every Wednesday night for half a year, we had Alsatian classes. And it really piqued my interest, whet my appetite. I got to learn this. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. And the more I just delved into it, and it was actually wonderful. I watched videos, I read books, and I can show you all this stuff up here. I got on the internet, I ordered every Alsatian book that I could find. And what you'll figure out is there's not a whole lot of resources out there to learn Alsatian. You have to learn this language by somebody teaching you or from growing up hearing it spoken. Everything out there, the resources that are out there, the majority of them are geared towards French speakers. There's very little resources to learn Alsatian through English. So Les and Patsy, just so gracious, they came out, we had this Alsatian class, and 2 years later I went back in 2017. And I'm talking to Anique and Monique, and I can finally communicate directly with them some, and I'm talking to Francis Havey, and just a wonderful guy. He was my first friend and still my best friend in Alsace. And he stops and he looks at me and says, how did you do this? And I said, do what? He said, 2 years ago, you come over here and you knew like 2 words, Sufa and Brunsa. He said, now you're speaking to me. And I said, I studied. Francis, I studied for 6 months. Every day I read, and we had classes every Wednesday. And he said, that's impossible. That's not enough time. I said, no, it really is. It's enough time if you want to learn. So the main thing here to learn Alsatian, you really have to want to learn it. So if you want to learn, that's plenty of time. And this course is going to go about 9 months. So I think all of you will have a really good start at the end of the course. So fast forward, current times, Father Roger was very interested in Alsatian. He said, I want to learn it. I want to promote it. This is a great thing. So he asked Miss Helen Lutz, can you teach me Alsatian? And Helen said, no, I can't teach anything, but I know a young guy that can. So she called me and told me a story. I'm thinking, that's great. I want to meet this young guy. You know, maybe I can learn something from him. Turns out the young guy was me. I said, whoa, Helen, I'm not qualified to do this. I can't teach an Alsatian class. And she kind of talked me off the ledge and said, no, but maybe you can at least tell people, how you learned it and what you studied. I said, yeah, I can do that. But then I got to thinking about it and I said, you know, we need to do more than that. I mean, sure, I can say, oh, I read this book cover to cover and this one, I watched this video. I said, we need to do more than that. We need to have a class. And I said, I'm not qualified to teach a class, so I reached out to some of the most qualified people that I know to teach this class. So we put together a curriculum planning group, and I want to thank them. They're here tonight. Of course, Les and Patsy are here tonight, and they speak Alsatian wonderfully. Patsy says no, they do. And Jerry Boyce, I reached out to teachers. I said, look, I don't know how to plan a curriculum. So I called some teachers in. Jerry Boyce Butler, sitting right over here. Lisa, where are you at? Lisa Schweres? Lisa, teacher. And then I went to my longtime friend, Bill Shearhart. And I said, Bill, I need you to help me with this. And Bill said, whoa, I'm not qualified. I said, good, welcome to the team. Neither am I. And then Mom and Dad were with us every meeting. And also I asked Kent Keaton, you're going to meet Kent. He's going to teach us proper syntax, sentence structure, and so forth. I'm going to explain that in a little while. We're going to get into some German to do that. And I'm going to tell you why momentarily. And I think, is that everybody that was there in the curriculum? I don't want to leave anybody out. I think we got it, huh? Bradford is going to be speaking to you tonight. Is Bradford here?
Not yet.
Not yet, he's on the way. So Bradford, he's on the way, but he's the final speaker you're going to hear tonight. So he'll be here in plenty of time. So I've told you about us. I've introduced the curriculum planning group to you. Now, one of the biggest hindrances to learning Alsatian is the fear of speaking. Do not be afraid. Les will tell you, I had no fear. I spoke it wrong. But what we're going to do now, we want to know who you are. So you're going to introduce yourself to the class, but you're going to do it in Alsatian. So we're going to go down the road. Let's start now. I'll give you the primer here. So what you're going to say, you're going to say, Gute Abend, good evening, ich heiss, I'm called, and you give me your name. Y'all want to do it as a group first?
Yes.
Okay. Gute Abend, ich heiss, state your name. So now, and I think properly, that's kind of like Spanish when, you know, like, ¿Cómo se llama? Yes? Oh, before I get too far into this, let me also say, at the end of this course, the goal is at Alsatian Festival, we have Alsatians coming. And I would love for y'all to be able to speak to the Alsatians, and I think we'll get you there. But the reason I mention it now, I was talking to Darren, our mayor. Darren, can you wave your hand there? So we have Alsatians coming, and they're going to be staying with host families. It's a big thing in Alsace. When we were there, they said, how are you going to get around? I'm going to rent a car. No, you're not. I'm driving you. Where are you staying? We're going to get a hotel over in Strasbourg. No, you're staying at our house. That's their nature. Wonderful people. So what the Castroville community is going to do is host these Alsatian families, and they have all of them covered except 2 families, Diane? Is that right? We need 2 families that are willing to host an Alsatian. And I was told that there may not be a lot of English spoken by some of these folks. So this is a great primer. So keep in mind, we need 2 families, 2 extra bedrooms, I think you said?
Yeah, each family, 2 bedrooms. That's the problem. It's easy to get, families say, oh, I have a extra bedroom. But I have groups,
Okay.
Be together. Anyway.
I only have 1 bedroom.
Yeah.
Well, please see Diane if you think you might be able to help with that. And we'll probably put that on the ALPS channel, Alsatian Language Preservation Society on Facebook. Is everybody here on Facebook? Raise your hand if you're not on Facebook. Okay. The majority, everyone here is on Facebook. So there is the Alsatian Language Preservation Society page, and we're going to put a lot of this material on there, and there is a lot of information on there. If you're not a member of that page, please ask to join, and we will go ahead and get you accepted into that group. So let's go down the road. We're gonna do our introductions. So remember, Gudova, ich heiss, and tell us your name. Now properly, it would probably be Gudova, mi name ish, my name is, but ich heiss is kind of the proper, is the shortcut way to say it. I'm called. Yes?
Mark, when you say Gudova, is it gut, over?
Good is good. Over. So we're gonna cheat. I know the accent. I struggle with my accent, but we're gonna take a shortcut. So it's probably the U, umlauted U and the E, and it's probably good over. But if you just say, for right now, we'll work on the accent. But if you just like boot with a G, good over, that'll probably get you there, right? They'll understand you. One thing about the Alsatians, they're incredible people, and they love when you try to talk. It's just, they find it fascinating, and they have this innate ability to understand language. So even my horrible accent, they kind of turn an ear towards you, and then they get it. So we'll work on the accent as the class progresses, and Les is going to be the one that's going to help us with that. So let's start. Lisa, will you start us off? Introduction?
Gudova, ich heiße Lisa.
All right. Hi, Lisa. Bradford?
Wie geht's over? Mein Name ist Bradford Burma.
See, Bradford said it. My name is. So that's the alternative I was telling you. Okay, next.
What's your name?
What's your name?
You can do it. Gudova.
Gudova, ich heiße.
There you go.
Gisela.
All right, Jerry.
Gudova, ich heiße Jerry.
Okay.
Gudova, ich heiss Carolyn.
Gudova, ich heiss Helen.
See, perfect. She should be up here teaching this. I'm telling you. She got me into this. Patsy?
Gudova, ich heiss Patsy.
Okay.
Hallo, mein Name ist Gerard Les.
And he is teaching this, so y'all are love him.
Gudova, mein Name ist, ich heiße
Either way.
Carol.
Good, good. Either way is a proper way to say it. Thank you.
Gudova, ich heiße Vicky.
There you go.
Gudova, ich heiße Kay.
Cordova, ich heiße David.
Gudova, ich heiße Bill.
And he's helping teach this
The easy
too.
part should be your name. You should get that.
Yeah, that's right. Nobody should get their name wrong.
Gudova, ich heiße Stephanie. Gudova, ich heiße Maureen.
Gudova, ich heiße Sylvia.
Cordova, ich Name ist Mike. Mein Name ist Mike.
Gudova, ich heiße Jones.
You can do it.
I don't like talking.
We'll let you start next week then.
Gudova, ich heiße Karen.
Cordova, ich heiße Dennis.
Gudova, ich heiße Mike.
Gudova, ich heiße Julie.
Guten Abend, ich bin Deutschlehrer.
So that's the German version right there. That's right.
Mein
He
Name
says,
ist Int.
yeah, he said good Abend, which is good evening in German. And he said, I speak German, and then he said his name. So you're going to learn some German, and I'm going to explain why in detail here momentarily. Diane?
Gudova, ich heiss Diane.
Cordova, ich heiße Garrett.
Ich bin Everett.
All right, that'll work. Good.
Gudova, ich heiß Pearson.
Yes, good.
Good job.
Gudova, ich heiße Caitlin. Gudova, ich heiße Randa.
Gudova, ich heiße Denise.
Gudova, ich heiße Yvette.
Wie geht's, Cousin? Hello, cousin. How's it going, cousin?
Godova, ich heiße Kristen.
Godova, ich heiße Willa.
Godova, ich bin Philip.
Godova, ich bin Edie.
Godova, ich heiße Mark.
Now, I gotta tell you, that Mark Kemp, he's a very fluent speaker. He should probably be up here too.
No pressure here.
So no pressure, because he kind of walked by and he said, I'm gonna critique you and I'm gonna call you out. So, yeah, watch out for that guy right there.
Godova, ich heiße Rosalind.
Godova, ich heiße Wanda.
Godova, ich heiße Colleen.
Godova, ich heiße Deanne.
Godova is Ice Curtis.
Godova, ich heiße Shirley.
Wie geht's? Mein Name ist Darren.
Sounds good. All right, very good.
Godova, ich heiße Carrie.
Godova, ich heiße Jenny.
Godova, ich heiße Beth.
Godova, ich heiße John.
Godova, Nami, and Nico.
Godova, mein Name ist Josh.
Godova, mein Name ist Darren.
What order are we going in? I lost, the round table confused me back there.
Godova, ich heiße Pam.
Godova, ich heiße Haley.
Godova, ich heiße Julie. Godova, ich heiße Lori.
Godova, ich heiße Chrissy.
Godova, ich heiße Norma.
Godova, ich heiße Carrie. Godova, ich heiße Anastasia.
All right, we got everyone, see? Oh, no, we got, oh, one more, come on, we all gotta do it. All right. So now, Yvette.
Can you tell us the proper spelling of this?
Okay, so yeah, we're gonna get to that. This is not a written language, and we're gonna get to that in just a minute. So everything in Alsatian, if you try to write it, is written phonetically, and I'll talk about that in a minute.
You know, these round tables with the square heads are not too good.
Oh yeah, we have the man behind the camera, and thank you, Clinton. I'm gonna name you in the curriculum planning group because Clinton is an absolute professional at what he does. And so many people said, well, I live out of the area, I'd like to see this class. Can you record it? And that wasn't the original plan. So I called Clinton and said, what do you suggest? And very graciously, he said, he's a professional at what he does. He said, you know what, I'll be there the first session. So just can't thank him enough. He's going to give us some coaching. Yes. Story keeping. Yes. Shout out to story keeping. So we got to thank him, and he's going to give us some coaching on how to get the next sessions recorded. So I want to thank him tonight.
The mayor really wants me to participate. So, Godova, ich heiße Clinton Hobby.
Yes. All right. I tried to let you off the hook there, but the mayor didn't let you. Oh man. Okay. So let's go to our first slide. And what I want to tell you is whatever we accomplish in this class, if we advance our knowledge, if we have any progress, any vision in the preservation of this language and the learning of this language, it's only because we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? What I'm doing here, what we put together here, it's not a first effort. It's just an effort. So there have been great efforts before us, and I want to recognize some of these giants that have come before us. Modern times, we have two of them right here in the classroom, Les and Patsy Shearhart. They have given of their time and time again. They taught Alsatian classes in the Castroville library years ago. So Les and Patsy, and we have Bill with us tonight, as I mentioned. I don't know if y'all know, but his family, Blackie and Annette, they did, that was his grandparents. They wrote a dictionary, and they wrote the first version of that dictionary in 1976. And I was talking to Bill about this. You know, think about it. 1976, what kind of computers did we have? I don't even remember the TRS-80s in school until the 80s and 76, was there even a household computer?
No.
So no, I mean, it was typewriters. And if you think about it, now we are so blessed because on the ALPS channel, and you're gonna meet some of these people, you'll correspond with them. I think we're gonna try a Zoom meeting that they've agreed to during the course of this class. Some of the Alsatians and Alsas, when I would get stuck, I would reach out to them and say, you know, hey Francis, how do you say this? Or hey Dominique, how do you say this? And they would send me a response. Now they're 7 hours ahead of us over there, so I'd have to wait till morning, but I always got my response. Blackie and Annette and the Reen family, they didn't have that. So they were going from what was up here, and it was just a phenomenal achievement, especially for those times. So just want to recognize them. There's a lot of people. Helen Lutz has helped me a lot. I've asked her, how do you pronounce this? How do you say this? And you know, she called me the other day and said, hey, how do you say this word? And you know, I was like, well, my grandpa Biediger always said this, and I thought, wow, that's just a real honor for one of the most fluent speakers in this community to call me with a question. I should be calling you, you know. So Helen, one of those giants, and I don't want to forget anyone. I want class participation here. Raise your hand if you know somebody that you consider a giant in the Alsatian speaking community. Someone who's furthered this effort. Bradford?
There was a woman named Christian Wood that was here.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
her and Justine Youngman, and with the help of Paul Adolph's curriculum, they offered a class back in '97 to about 2002.
Maxine Friesenheim was in that class as well. I know she speaks some Alsatian.
Teresa Stein.
Teresa Stein.
Guy Holthouse.
Guy Holthouse, absolutely. He was like an ambassador to Alsace, wasn't he? Yeah. Anyone else that y'all can think of?
Frances Newman is.
Frances Newman, yes. How can we forget Frances Newman? Amazing, and she's very willing to teach people who want to learn. Absolutely. Jerry, if you could take me to the next slide. Here are some giants of current times. So did all of y'all see the movie at the Rainbow Theater?
Yes.
Yeah? Oh man, great. Again, Clinton, Josh, you in the back there? Josh put that together. Bradford. You know, it was kind of interesting. It all started on Josh's patio. Me, Bradford, Josh, Clinton, and Gordon actually said, hey, we need to do this. So Gordon got us all fired up about it, and then he said, sorry, I'm out of town. But I'm going to give Gordon credit because he's the one that got it started too. So these are some of the people involved in that movie. Just take a look at the names. I consider them giants in the current effort to preserve this language. And Diane Keaton, she actually transcribed everything on some of those. You did a lot of typing, if I remember. And Lisa Schweers did a lot of typing. I think all their names are up there for all the typing. Thank you to all these people. So let's go on to slide 3, and I'm going to try to move through this quickly. We have a lot to cover tonight, and I'm going to try to move through my part quickly, and I'm going to apologize to you. We're going to run a little long tonight. Hopefully not very long, but we're going to run over a little bit. So I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as I can, and then we'll give you a restroom break. We're going to go on to the next part of this. So let's talk about what is Alsatian. So to get back to what Yvette asked, it is a spoken Germanic dialect. So there's two key parts to that, spoken and Germanic. So it's not a written dialect. You can try to write it, but you're going to have to write it phonetically. So I see when I talk to the Alsatians online, for instance, the word shaney, which means nice in Alsatian, nice or pretty or whatever. Has a couple of different meanings, but some people will spell it S-C-H-E-N-I, some with a double E. Some will put the German spelling that's more like Shona. S-C-H, I think, Ken, it's S-C-H-O-E-N-E?
Yeah, that's Shun.
Shun, okay, so they will put the different spelling on it, so everybody spells things differently, and you got to kind of sound it out. So it's not a written language. It was never really intended to be. So you got to kind of sound it out, but you can write it phonetically. So what is it? It's a Germanic dialect, and it is not a written dialect. And you might have heard, looking for my glasses here, look at my notes. You might have heard, how many of you heard, well, it's like a mix of French and German, right? Have y'all heard that? Okay, I'm going to tell you that's wrong. That's nonsense. It is not a mix of French and German. It is so much more German. Now, over the years, just like we've done here in Texas, maybe a French word, a borrow word, or loan word has crept in there, but it's not a mix. I'm going to tell you, if anybody tells you that, say, no, that's absolutely incorrect. So, an example, here in Texas, it's Germanic, and then you hear like a word like plenty, for plenty. When the real word, that's not a real word, it's field, V-I-E-L, field. And then the V's are pronounced with the L, so we'll get into all that. But you hear people say blendy, and it's just an English word pronounced with a Alsatian accent, just like a bottle is a flash, but you hear people all the time say, "Lay me das boodle." Boodle. For bottle, that's not a word. You made that up, you know. But you said it with an Alsatian accent, so it kind of acceptable. Yeah, it's accepted because it kind of crept into the language. So if anybody says it's a mix of German and French, only because loaner words crept in there and they weren't real Alsatian words. What's that? In French, yeah. They do that in French too. And here, and I'll let Les talk to you more about the history he's gonna tonight of Alsatian. So it's a Germanic dialect, and you'll hear the regular German sometimes called High German, Hochdeutsch, or Standard German. Well, that's German. This is German. They kind of, and if you listen to Dominique Lang, which we're going to do, he's an Alsatian, that you're going to see him speaking about it here in a minute. They kind of developed independently of each other. I mean, some people will say, well, Alsatian was a medieval dialect and it kind of developed first. And then you'll hear the history. Some people say, yeah, but there was a Bible, and Martin Luther, he actually translated a Bible, and he used Hochdeutsch, or Standard German, and that became the accepted German. And I'll tell you, Kent's going to teach us, Standard German, it has much stricter grammar rules and everything else. Alsatian is, I love it, because Kent said it's like a kid's dream in a way, because the grammar rules are very relaxed. So it's actually very easy to learn, whereas German, it's very formal. So it is a Germanic dialect, and it developed kind of independently of Hochdeutsch or Standard German. Slide 4, if you would. Oh, and I'm sorry. Let's go back one, just to give you an idea. We're going to see a video here right now. It's a lady named Trixie. She's German. She's not Alsatian, and you're going to hear the different German dialects she's going to speak of. The one she's not going to speak, I put up there at the top, is Alsatian. And if you look under it, it says Elsassisch. And that's because in Alsatian, the language Alsatian is called Alsassisch. So if you're looking for videos and so forth, if you type in the search term Alsatian, you're going to see a bunch of German Shepherd dogs. Because that's what they're called. Have y'all tried that? Have you noticed that? And then I think that probably goes back to the World Wars, when there was a bunch of anti-German sentiment, and they didn't want to call it a German Shepherd, so they changed the name of the dog to an Alsatian, and so forth. But if you use the term Elsassisch, that is what the Alsatian language is called in Alsace. So that's why that's up there. You're not going to hear Trixie speak it, but don't worry, in a minute, I got you a slide of Alsatian. Your ear is going to immediately recognize it, because all of you pretty much in here grew up hearing it. But Elsassisch is sometimes called, because it's Germanic, you'll sometimes hear the Germans call it Elsasserdeutsch. Or sometimes you'll hear the Alsatians call it Elsasserdeutsch, because the proper German pronunciation for German in German is Deutsch, right, Kent? But the Alsatians pronounce it Deutsch. So these are the different, probably the main. Trixie says the 12. I would wager to say there's probably more than 12 German dialects.
Yes.
These are the main ones. So let's go ahead and if you would, Jerry, take me to the next slide. So we're gonna play this right now. I'm gonna tell you, sorry if there's something in there, some language or something in there. You know, the Europeans, they're a little more open about saying something that's risque or something like that than we are.
On Google's.
But let's get through the ads. We'll go ahead and let it play. You're gonna hear the difference in these dialects. And then we're gonna talk about the one she didn't speak, Alsatian, Alsatisch.
Hey Rabbits, it's Trixie. You all know that I am from Germany and I already told you that I live in a city close to Hamburg. But before I moved here, I spent my whole childhood in a village close to Hanover, which is pretty much in the middle of the upper half of Germany. Hanover is claimed to be the city where the clearest and purest type of German is spoken, the Standard German. In other regions of Germany, many Germans speak German with a dialect. And some of them are so unique and have such a special vocabulary that even I, as a German, have trouble understanding them. In this video, I want to give you examples of what the most popular German dialects sound like, always comparing them to Standard German and giving you subtitles and translations. I will really try my best to imitate the dialects that I chose, but of course I cannot master them perfectly. I still wanted to present them to you by myself and not with the help of others, because I kind of saw it as a challenge and also a chance to learn more about the country I live in. Now, after days of practicing, ask Eric, I even spoke Bavarian while taking a shower. I finally feel ready to do this video. But again, this is not a look how awesome I am imitating all these dialects kind of thing, but rather an educational and humorous attempt, and an experiment. Seriously, feel free to laugh about my lousy dialect skills. The only thing I want is to give you a small introduction to all these variations of the German language and to provide you with a fun video, of course. Before I start, this is how I normally speak, Standard German. Ich heiße Trixie und ich wohne in der Nähe von Hamburg. Ich bin in einer kleinen Stadt nahe Hannover aufgewachsen und dann immer mehr in den Norden gewandert. Now let's use this as a blank canvas and paint some dialects on it. Der hat mit Dreck am Stecke als Haar am Grenn. A Gesunder hat 1000 Wünsch. A Kranker bloß ein. Keiner mag, wenn ihr einen Durst habt. Was ist denn das für ein Kuhkaff hier? Na, kick mal einer an, kleines Fräulein. Wollen wir ihn zischen gehen? Nee, vergiss es. Geh mal nicht auf den Keks. Nur wär man nicht gleich Campingtroller. Das ist Pillepalle und die macht so ein Gewese. Pass mal auf, Keule, oder gib dir ihn auf den Dez, aber mit Schmackes. Doch nicht mehr? Wieso das denn nicht? Boah, das ist jeden Tag am Regnen. Sag mal noch mal her, was du da hast, Jacqueline. Sag mal, da brauchen wir doch im Leben nicht. Einfach bübsch, pass mal auf, unser Knacker. Ich wundere mich über nichts mehr. Da gehst ja blöde werden. Gehen Sie vielleicht mal zur Seite gehen, ich kann doch nicht fliegen tun. Was tust du? Gesagt ist gesagt. Betsch doch die Tür nicht so zu. Mama Jo kann dabei in den Haus gehen. Siehst mir jetzt grad ein bisschen dirnlig. Scheiß egal, erstmal ein Kirsch. Bei dir dann, wenn das fertig ist. Ah, küsst du wirklich nicht, küsst du Reue. Neben J hat die ein Milchgeschäft. Lieber Dreck am Stecke als im Dreck stecke. Wirst du dich gesund erhalten, trinken Hebelwoi in Kalde. Tut's dir in der Knucherreise, trinken Hebelwoi in Reise. Moin Leute, kommt ihr zum Schnacken eine Schmöken? Wer dat wat er kann und et dat es dient, dann is er wert, dat er lebt. Moin, der de Kat, da söpst du de Melk gut. Du musst aufpassen, das Esche is heiß. Verbrennt er nicht die Schnut? Was schon das für eine Frage? Ich kennt mich aufregen über der Zeitung gebabbel. Du waro trinken de. Wenn mir Fränkisch reden go, dann war's mir auch, was gemeint ist. Jo Soppel, hat dein Graut Stampfer. Dies ist mir fein wurscht. Du fängst dir gleich ein Watschen ein. Jo mein Spatzel, ich hab's doch gesagt. Stieg bist nett, aber halt war der Gewicht zu klar. Pass auf, dass du dein rotzgelagnete Biers abschlagt. Alright, rabbits, this was the best I could do. I know it's not perfect, I know I did a lousy job here, but at least I tried my best, and I think you got into the different dialects a little bit more. Again, I want to point out that I mean no offense to anyone, and I don't claim to be perfect or even close to perfect in imitating one of those dialects. I deeply hope you had fun with the video and you learned a little bit. I now have a twist in my tongue, so I need to rest it a little bit. I wish you all a very, very beautiful day and see you in the next video. Bye!
Alright. So the one she didn't speak was Alsatian, but don't worry, we got you covered. Jerry, next slide. So what you're going to hear here, many of you grew up hearing Alsatian, you're going to recognize right away. And if you go back to that previous one, you'll hear that some of those were similar to Alsatian. I could understand some of those dialects much better than I understood others, and there were some I didn't understand at all. But you'll hear this here, and you're going to recognize the sing-songy, familiar cadence of this one. If you'll play this one. Yeah, gotta have the.
Yeah, 'cause that don't sound Alsatian.
No.
Alsatian.
1,
1,
2,
2,
3,
3,
4,
4,
5,
5,
6,
6,
7,
7,
8,
8,
9,
9,
10.
10.
Der Nordwind und die Sonne stritten miteinander. Jeder behauptete, er sei der Stärkere von ihnen, als sie einen Reisenden sahen, der des Weges in seinen Mantel gehüllt daherkam.
Der Nordwind und die Sonne haben miteinander
There's your Alsatian.
Jeder hat gemeint, er ist der stärkste von den zwei. Nur ist ein Wanderer gekommen zu laufen, in einem dicken Mantel eingewickelt.
Sie waren sich einig, wer auch immer der Erste wäre, welcher den Reisenden dazu brächte, seinen Mantel auszuziehen, würde als der Stärkste angesehen werden.
Der Wind und die Sonne haben sie noch einig gemacht, dass der erste von den zwei, wie ein Wanderer seinen Mantel ausziehen macht, der stärkste ist.
Dann fing der Wind an, mit aller Kraft zu wehen, aber je kräftiger er wehte, desto tiefer hüllte der Reisende sich in seinen Mantel ein und letztendlich gab der Nordwind es auf, ihm den Mantel auszuziehen.
Noch hat der Wind angefangen, fest zu blosen. Aber wie mehr der Wind geblasen hat, wie dichter hat der Wanderer seinen Mantel zugemacht.
Dann begann die Sonne zu scheinen, und schon nach einer Weile wurde es dem Reisenden zu warm, und er zog sich seinen Mantel aus. Somit musste also der Nordwind einsehen, dass die Sonne der Stärkere von ihnen war.
Die Sonne hat noch angefangen zu scheinen, bis dass der Wanderer zu heiß hat und seinen Mantel ausgezogen hat. So hat der Wind erkennen, dass die Sonne der stärkste ist von den zwei.
Alright, did y'all kind of did your ear kind of hear that familiar Alsatian and how different is it from German?
Sing-song.
The sing-song, that's right, the sing-song Alsatian. Absolutely. So one more slide I'm going to play here, and what this is, this man here, Dominic Lang, wonderful guy. I asked y'all if y'all were in the ALPS group on Facebook. He's a member, and we're going to try to. He said he'd do a Zoom meeting with us. So later in the course, when we learn a little bit, we're going to try to speak some Alsatian with him. Okay. But Dominic's going to kind of tell you his story and how he was born in Alsace, grew up in the Paris area, moved back to Alsace because he's a doctor and he's working with elderly people in the hospital, and they were all speaking Alsatian. And he's like, yeah, I got to kind of learn it. It's my roots. It's my history. So let's go ahead and play Dominic's story if we could.
Ich heiße Dominic Lang, ich bin von hier, ich wohne in Olsa, es ist eine kleine Stadt, so ungefähr 25 Kilometer von Straßburg. Und für alles bin ich nicht ganz elsässisch. Ich bin geboren in Elsass, ich bin geboren in Milhuse, das ist im Oberland, im Haut-Rhin. Und habe meine Kindheit verbracht in der Nähe von Paris. Und danach bin ich zurückgekommen zum Elsass für meine Studie von Medizin in 1974. Und seitdem bin ich da geblieben, bin ich gar nicht weggefahren. Ich bin immer da geblieben und habe immer da geschafft und schaffe noch immer hier in Olsa. Ich bin ein Doktor, ich arbeite mit älteren Leuten im Spital von Olsa. Was kann ich sonst sagen? Über dem Elsässer. Elsässisch ist ein ganz spezielles Dialekt. Es ist Spruch, könnte man sagen. Es kommt nicht genau vom Deutsch, vom heutigen Deutsch. Es ist Héritier vom Mittelhochdeutsch ist ein Spruch vom Mittelalter. Es ist gesprochen worden im Mittelalter in Deutschland. Und es ist zum Elsassisch geworden in den Jahrhunderten, als der Deutsche auf seiner Seite evoluiert hat. Wegen dem haben wir viele Unterschiede zwischen Deutsch und Elsässisch. Was kann man sagen? Die Prononciation ist nicht dasselbe. Die Deutschen haben das heutige Hochdeutsch, wir haben das Elsässisch. Und was wir auch können sagen, ist, dass Elsässisch ganz verschieden ist zwischen Nord und Süd. Die Dialekte sind ganz verschieden. Im Südelsass redet man mehr, ist der Spruch viel näher zu dem Schweizer Dialekt, zu dem Schweizerdeutsch. Das ist ganz speziell. Und das Norddialekt, das Dialekt vom Norden, ist viel scheint wie der Dialekt im Deutschland von der Saar, vom Saarland oder vom Baden-Württemberg. Wir haben im Elsass haben wir auch viel Wein und die besten Weine sind produziert im Südelsass, im Oran. Da haben wir die beste Cépage, die beste Wein aus dem Elsass. Und das Wein vom Elsass ist ganz speziell. Es ist fast immer Weißwein. Wir haben ein paar Rosé und wir haben nur einen richtigen Roter. Das ist der Rot d'Otrot. Und der Rot d'Otrot ist produziert ein paar Kilometer von hier, das heißt im Bas-Rhin. Wir haben ein paar gute Weine im Bas-Rhin, auch ganz speziell. Und der Rouge d'Otrot ist vom Bas. So. Jetzt, wie bin ich gekommen auf dem Elsassisch? Also, wie gesagt, habe ich meine Kindheit in Paris verbracht und ich bin zurückgekommen in Elsass zu meinen Wurzeln in 1974. Und an der Zeit habe ich angefangen mit älteren Leuten zu arbeiten im Spital. Und an der Zeit haben die älteren Leute fast nur Elsassisch oder Deutsch geredet. Und ich bin es obligé geworden, Elsassisch zu lernen. Und als ich auch Deutsch reden ist es sozusagen naturell gewesen, dass ich vom Deutsch nach dem Elsassisch gerutscht habe. Und dann auch mit dem Reden, wenn ich mit den Leuten wieder geredet habe, mit den Jahren.
What's the difference
Okay, so
between a
that's
child
just
that gets into a
an
top-tier
introduction to
school?
Dominic Lang. We'll do a Zoom meeting with him. You'll get to know him. He didn't grow up, of course, as he said, speaking Alsatian from when he was little. He learned it later. And the thing I like about the way Dominic speaks, in Texas, we speak a lot slower. So he speaks it slower, and you can actually understand what he said. You know, I told Bill in a conversation, I said, as much as I study and read and watch these videos and speak to the Texas Alsatians, you know, I feel like, great, I'm getting the hang of this. And I told him I feel like a kid that wandered into a pawn shop and bought a secondhand fiddle, and you learn to play a little song, you think, okay, I'm getting this. And then the real Alsatians show up, and it's like they're all playing a Stradivarius, and they're playing Beethoven and Mozart, and here I am, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, right? So don't get frustrated. I mean, by speaking with them, you will get better. And speaking with the Texas Alsatians is the way to start. I mean, when the Alsatians show up, it's a little intimidating for me because they are fast and fluent, you know. Okay, let's go to next slide, course objectives. So what we want to do here, and I'm going to try to pick it up, we're falling really behind here. I'm sorry, we are going to run long tonight. So we want to learn some proper syntax, grammar, sentence structure, and remember, this is a Germanic dialect, and I'll tell you, even in Alsace, there's two dialects. There's a northern and a southern, and we're going to speak the southern one here. It's Hot Rhine, because that's where the Medina County folks come from. And if you learn the southern dialect, the northern Alsatians will understand you. It's just a little different. Main difference that I noticed is it's kind of hard on the ear to pick up because they'll take a hard G and they'll pronounce it, they'll actually change it to a J, but they pronounce it like a Y. So instead of good morga, they'll say good moria. And it's like, you know, it just takes a minute to pick up. But if you learn the Hot Rhine, which is what we're learning, dialect, the northern Alsatians, they have an innate ability to learn and understand languages. They're going to understand you anyway. But we need to learn basic Alsatian here, conversational Alsatian, syntax, grammar, sentence structure. Because this is a Germanic language, we've kind of let the foundation here in Castroville, we've let it crumble, right? So probably 40, 50 years ago, could you learn it just by hearing it and speaking it and by ear? Sure. Can we do that today? No, because it's not spoken enough to do that. So Kent has graciously agreed that he's going to give us the next 3 classes in German. So the reason why Alsatian follows the German sentence structure, grammar rules, syntax, and there's some unique ones. This is Alsatian, I think it's the same, correct me if I'm wrong, Kent, but verbs will often come at the end of a sentence, not always, there's exceptions to every rule. Verbs will often come at the end of a sentence. Nouns, whether they're at the beginning of a sentence, middle of a sentence, they're capitalized. So when you read it, nouns are capitalized. The past tense, in English, we add ed at the end to make it past tense generally. Alsatian, they'll put a G apostrophe or a GE in front of the word generally, and that makes it past tense. And German is kind of the same way, right?
No.
No? We're going to learn that then. But in Alsatian, you'll see a G apostrophe or GE, and then you know that that's the past tense of it. And it took a while, and actually Les taught me that in one of the classes. So we are going to rebuild the foundation, and part of the ALPS group is Renee Cronenberger. Renee is a very fluent Alsatian speaker in Alsace, and he's a bit of a historian, and he is very pro-Alsatian language. So much to the fact that he really doesn't like speaking French. So if you speak anything else with him, he prefers German or English, and not French, because when he was a little boy, if they were caught speaking Alsatian in school, they got in trouble. They were forced to learn and speak French. He didn't like it. So he told me a story that when they got caught speaking Alsatian in school, they were made to stay after school. They had to kneel and pea grab it. So it was Renee Cronenberger that helps me a lot in what I'm trying to say. And Renee is the one that said, if you want people to learn Alsatian, start with German. Let them learn some basic German because it's all based on German. And that's why we're going to have the next 3 sessions in German. It'll get your ear used to it because, just an example, if we were going to English speak like we Alsatian speak, it would kind of like this sound because the verb's often at the end, right? You don't say rede Alsacisch, you say Alsacisch rede. The verb's always at the end. So
No.
in French, in German, no?
No, in German, the second word in the sentence is a verb.
Okay.
It comes at the end of the sentence when you're using the helping verb with it, like haben or sein.
Yeah, and we're going to learn all that, and so many of the rules are based on German, and what you'll learn then is even many of the words are identical. Some are different, but many of the words are even identical to German. So we're going to have a few lessons of German just to get our minds thinking with the right syntax and sentence structure. One of my coworkers, prosecutors, works with me. He was born in Germany, lived there until he was 12 years old. His first language was German. Speaks fluent, perfect, unaccented English, fluent, perfect German. And he said, tell the class to think about it as kind of inside out. He said, yeah, I can't really describe it better than that, but it's inside out. And that was his words of wisdom, whatever that means, right? Another reason that I'm thinking that we're going to jump into German is if we don't, and I said this and Bill said, well, don't discount being a words and phrases speaker, and he's right. But part of the course, we're going to memorize Blackie's dictionary cover to cover. I did it once. I've kind of forgotten some of it. We're going to re-memorize this. We're going to memorize it. And you can memorize all the vocabulary you want, but if you don't know how to form a sentence, you're going to be relegated to the status of a words and phrases speaker. Now, Bill said, well, don't discount that, because if somebody goes from speaking none to words and phrases, that's a victory. And I agree with that. But we want to try to go a little further in this class. So that's one of the reasons we're going to learn some German syntax, grammar, sentence structure. And also German, another reason, it's a good cheat code. So when I'm talking to the Alsatians on the ALPS group, and I'm thinking, how do I format this sentence? You know, I don't want to get the verb in the wrong place, or, you know, I don't know how the sentence should be structured. You can translate English to German, and you can get the word, you can get the whole sentence. But what I'll do then is I'll say, that's how it's phrased, and then I'll kick out the German word and I'll put in the strictly Alsatian word. And it's a good cheat code. So that's just a little tip too to help you format. That's why we're going to learn some German. But don't worry. I mean, I know the next 3 lessons Kent's going to teach us, and Kent's a college professor, and it's going to be detailed, right? But don't let that intimidate you. Try your best. Keep up. I remember the days of diagramming sentences, and probably wasn't my favorite thing, right? But we needed to do that to really learn proper English. So, you know, yeah, we can learn it by speaking, but if you want to speak properly, then that's kind of what they taught us. And just kind of grasp the best you can, and don't worry. We're gonna get to Alsatian. We will have you up to your eyebrows in Alsatian for 9 months, right? So we will get there, but you're gonna need to walk before you run. And the example I give, how many of you have seen Karate Kid, the original? Everybody? You know, Daniel's frustrated and he's mad because, you know, Mr. Miyagi's got him like painting the fence up and down, very specific. Wax the floor, wax on, wax off, right? He's washing his cars. Finally, Daniel just loses it and he yells at Miyagi, what the heck are we doing here? You know, you're making me do all your work, you know. And finally, Mr. Miyagi says, show me paint the fence, right? Show me wax the floor. It's all blocks and moves, and it all kind of comes together. So if you start getting a little frustrated and say, why are we having to learn German? There's a reason for it, and it's all going to come together. So just trust in the class, and we'll get through it together, okay? Let's see. Preserve the Alsatian language. I'm sorry, just a couple other things. Preserve the Alsatian language. What I want to tell you on that point, you've already spoken some tonight. Do not be afraid to speak. You know, the fear of speaking, Bradford and I, our generation, we were never expected to speak it properly. So, hey, we kind of have free reign to speak. My parents' generation, they were a little bit embarrassed to speak because if they didn't speak it perfectly, they got chastised, right? But that's the very mindset that's killing this language. Stop, you know, just get out there and speak it. You know, if you speak it wrong, you made a mistake. It's not the end of the world. Everybody who's not a native speaker is going to make a mistake. And I'm going to tell you 2 examples. One, with permission of Les and Patsy, I'm going to tell you a mistake that Les made. And then I'll tell you a mistake I made that pales in comparison to what I did, right? So Les and Patsy were sitting around with a group of folks, Alsatians, at a table. and they were having some great food, and they were talking about, you know, the food and cooking. Well, in Alsatian, cook, K-O-C-H, is cook. Kia is cow. So Les announces to the group that Patsy's a really good cow. Because he mixed up the two words. It happens, right? And I did something a heck of a lot worse than that. You know, so we were all over at, it was Larry and Patsy's house, I believe. We had Alsatians in. We're all sitting around these tables. We're having a great conversation. I'm thinking, wow, look at me speaking Alsatian, right? Mom and Dad were at the table. My oldest uncle is sitting at the table. He's a Catholic priest. We're all sitting around the table. Well, we were planning things to do with the Alsatians and things that they don't really get to do in Alsace, and they were seeing the Alamo and this and that. Well, they wanted to come out to the ranch and shoot. So, you know, I said, Bradford was there that night, and he said, hey, great, I'll bring my 50 cal. And I said, oh, great, I got some cool stuff for him to shoot also. And the Alsatians are getting all excited. And I said, Nitshisa and Alsace? I meant to ask him, you don't shoot in Alsace? That's not what I asked him. So we had a German exchange student back in high school. You know, I just very rudely asked him if they don't have bowel movements in Alsace. Right? You know, you don't defecate in Alsace, right?
That's correct German, and German to shoot is Schießen.
It is, okay. And see, I do the cheat code, and I thought it was right. But of course, I see Dad's head just drop, and he shakes his head, and my uncle, the Catholic priest, his eyes get this big, right? And he just does a big belly laugh. And I'm like, what did I say? And Dad looks at me and says, Chiesa. So he corrected me, but I said the wrong word. And Christian Havey, wonderful man, God rest his soul. He was over here. He passed, sadly, about a year ago. Just wonderful man. Without missing a beat, the Alsatians are such great folks. He just looks at me, shrugs his shoulders, and says, yeah, you have the dog. Those of you that understand Alsatian, that means, yeah, every day. So don't be afraid to mess up. It's through your mistakes that you're going to learn. Do you think as I stand here right now, I don't clearly know the difference between Chiesa and Shisa? I mean, it's a rough way to learn, but I learned it, right? So don't be afraid to speak. One point I wanted to make, I spent a lot of time learning Spanish. We had a wonderful high school Spanish teacher. She was great. And then when I got to college, I kind of got pushed into the advanced Spanish courses, which was very difficult, challenging. I'm glad I did it. But at the very get-go, that wonderful teacher in high school said something that made a lot of sense, and it helped me through those advanced courses. She said, don't get so hung up on saying a word-for-word translation of what it is you're trying to say. The idea is to communicate what's in your head, to get the idea out there. So we just want to get what's in our cope out there to the other person, right? So just focus on getting the idea across. I mean, I can say, I'm hungry, but it's the same thing if I stand up here and say, I'm starving, or I say, I want to go get something to eat. It's the idea. Just communicate the idea. You know, that's all you're doing. You're communicating. Don't worry about word for word. Slide 8. Okay, so let's talk about some resources we're going to use in the class. I've already touched on this. There is not a lot of resources out there to learn Alsatian, especially for English speakers. So what we're going to do, one of the great ones I told you about already, this book right here. I memorized it cover to cover at one point. I need to do it again. We're going to do that in this class. This is a great resource right here. Paul Adolph is a Alsatian language professor. I think he's a professor over there of English, German, Alsatian. Super knowledgeable guy. I think he's pretty elderly now. I think Bradford, did you get to meet him?
Yes, yeah, I've been talking.
Yeah, I don't think he can accept visitors anymore. He's up in years, but he is just phenomenal. And what this is if you look at the way this book is structured, It's kind of a dictionary, but it gives you the word, and then it gives you the Alsatian word. It'll give you the different dialects, if there's different dialects of it in Alsace. And then it'll give you the German word, it'll give you the English word, and it'll give you the French word, and then he uses the words in Alsatian sentences. So what I'm gonna tell you about these resources, these first two, as I told you, Bill Schierhardt's family, they produced this one. So Bill has very graciously agreed to do a reprint, and he's going to try to have enough printed so that everyone in here can get one of these if you want. And he's going to make them available to you at basically just super reasonable price, his cost of getting them printed. So talk to Bill after class, let him know how many he needs to get printed. He's working on it now, I think. But this here is just indispensable. You need this book. This here is probably top dog. This one here, Learning Alsatian Through English. See me afterwards if you want the publisher number. We'll get it for you. If you can get online and find the hard copy of this, it's great. They're not easy to find. I don't think they're in print anymore. So you can find them sometimes on Amazon or whatever, but you really want to get one of these and read it at home, cover to cover. We're going to read out of it during the class, but read it cover to cover. Whatever we do here in the class, I wish I could tell you you're going to sit here for an hour and a half, 2 hours every week, and I wish I could tell you you're going to walk out here speaking Alsatian, but that's just not the way it works. For all the time you spend in this classroom, you need to spend a lot more time at home reading, studying, watching videos. And this book is great. Just get this if you can. Read it cover to cover. That's a great one. The last one in our ALPS group that I talked about on Facebook, Sylvie Troxler, is in that group. She wrote a children's book. And Curtis and Shirley, where are y'all at? So Curtis and Shirley were over in Alsace recently, and they got to meet Sylvie. And I've communicated with her online. She very graciously sent back with them for free some of her books, the updated one here. So what we're going to do is we're going to learn the more detailed stuff out of the first two. The children's book, we're learning at a child's level, basically, right? We're new to this. So it's great to read out of that children's reader because it's for kids to learn Alsatian, and that's about the level that we're learning at right now. So we'll talk about course structure in just a minute, but those are the resources that we're going to use, and I'll tell you that you're really not going to find anything on Babbel or Rosetta Stone. You're not going to be able to just get online and find many resources to learn Alsatian. I think I did find one that was called Instant Immersion. I haven't purchased it. I haven't tried that one yet. There was one I had on my iPhone that was You Talk Alsatian. It was good. It was basic. It was basically travel terms though. And it taught you in the northern Alsatian dialect. So it had those J's and stuff in there, so it wasn't quite what we speak here. So you're not going to find a lot of resources that are applicable to us. So let's talk about what we're going to do here in the class real quickly, and then I'm going to sit down. Teaching method, the course structure. I'm going to tell you right now, nothing that we do in this class is intended to embarrass anyone. It's meant to be challenging, but you know, it's meant to be a user-friendly course. We don't want to embarrass you. Each of you spoke some Alsatian tonight. It was a little awkward for some of you, I know, but you did it, and it's not the intent to embarrass anyone. The course, as I told you, is going to last about 9 months, and there's going to be some homework. Just the way it's got to be if you're going to learn. I mean, you're going to go home and you're going to memorize vocabulary, right? You got to memorize vocabulary. You're never going to speak if you don't know the words, right? So we're going to go home and we're going to memorize the vocabulary. And then what you're going to do is we're going to come back probably next class, and we're going to have a little quiz over your vocabulary. And we're not going to keep a grade book or anything. Jerry offered. She was going to bring a teacher's grade book. And I said, no, we're not going to do that. You know, we're not going to. I know we have teachers in here, but we're not going to do that, right? It's just so that you know what words you missed, which words you need to work on, and you don't have to learn in the embarrassing way I did when I used the wrong word, right? So when you miss that word, then you'll know which one you still need to focus on. Okay, so we talked about course structure. As we go through the dictionary, we have some experts here. They've agreed to help us pronounce the words, because sometimes you'll read these words and the frustration is, how do you pronounce that, right? Well, usually the accent is on the first syllable, right? But Les, Patsy, Helen, we're going to ask you, how do you pronounce that? And thank God we have experts in the class to help us with that. And we will use a little bit of, we're going to use a little bit of, there was a method Bill and I were exposed to in law school. He just said, oh, you're really going to do that? And I said, we have to. Socratic method. Teachers, do y'all know what Socratic method is? Right? So, oh my God. They did it to us in law school. I hated it. Absolutely hated it. Did I mention I hated it? Right? It is awful. So, and we're not going to do it to that extent. But it's going to be the Socratic method where you might say, Miss Lutz, kannst du stehen auf? Can you stand up, right? And Miss Lutz would stand up, and then we ask some questions, right, in Alsatian and respond, and maybe we quiz you a little bit over the vocabulary you should have memorized, and we get you speaking and thinking on your feet. As much as I hated that Socratic method, it was kind of that Karate Kid moment, and Bill will tell you, you get into court and you've got an opponent and you're arguing to a judge, and now you're thinking on your feet, and you're making those legal arguments, and you're thinking on your feet, and it's great training. And it's a lot like speaking. When you're speaking to the Alsatians, when they come over for Alsatian Festival, you got to be able to think on your feet, because they're fast, they're fluent, and it's intimidating, right? You want to retreat into yourself and switch back to English. But I'm going to tell you, don't do that. You're never going to learn. You're going to learn to speak better by speaking with people who speak better than you, right? I learned from Les and Patsy, who speak way better than me. So, don't do that. You're gonna need to speak, and you're gonna have to say loud and proud, I'm gonna try this, right? And if you mess up, nothing's gonna happen. You're gonna learn if you mess up. So Socratic method, we'll use a little bit of that. Speaking, questions, so forth. And last thing I'm gonna tell you is, the course is free. So the only thing we're gonna ask of you, we're gonna need some volunteers. So what we're gonna need is people to get there a little early, set up all these tables and chairs. At the end of the course, help us put away the tables and chairs. We need somebody, the curriculum planning group, we've been pretty busy making the PowerPoints and doing this and that and texting each other. We're going to need somebody that's willing to help us type up the quizzes, right? And maybe help us, get copies made, type up the quizzes and so forth. So we're gonna be asking for some teaching assistants. And our goal then, at the end of this course, Alsatian Festival, late April. Phil, do you know the exact date? 25th or something like April? Alsatian Festival, last Saturday in April. So our goal is there's going to be a busload of Alsatians arriving in Castroville. There's going to be several at the Alsatian Festival. And the goal is for everyone here to be able to go up, introduce yourself, and speak some Alsatian with them, okay? Any questions about anything that we're going to be covering right now? I'm way over time, so if anybody need a quick restroom break? No. If anybody needs a quick, okay. If not, we'll move on. I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to turn it over to Les right now.
I don't know that I can follow that.
Oh.
That gives me 5 minutes, right?
Yeah, that's it. You got it.
Well, I want to stress.
I'll sit where you are. Take the podium.
I want to stress the importance of Blackie and Annette's book. Wonderful book. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm getting half of the royalties from it. I think Bill's going to make it very affordable to everybody. Okay, can you get that history of Alsace on there, Jerry? Oh, that's the. I want that slide that says history of Alsace.
There it is.
Yeah, Alsace is the ancient land. She added all these good things to my simple little thing. Alsace is a very, very ancient land. nobody really knows how old it is. There have been studies made that it was, there was some diggings out there back in, especially in the Strasbourg area, that it's dated back to 2000 BC. But there's also indications that the Neanderthal lived in Alsace. So it's been a long, stressful area. It's been war-trodden. There's been people back there that, such as the Celts, the Huns, the Franks, the Romans. They all settled in Alsace. After that, okay, Julius Caesar, back in 58 BC, conquered Alsace for the Romans, and he was he took over for the Roman Empire. But by the fall of the Roman Empire, and I'm going to have to try to speed this up a little bit, it was the Alemannic tribes of the German origin that controlled the area, and around the upper Rhine River. It is this group that we're going to study here, because this is the group in which our parents came, ancestors. They are the people who gave the name to Alsace. They're also the people who gave the language to Alsace. The name comes from the river. Can you get back to that? The name comes from this river. The river runs from south to north. Starts here at the southern tip of Alsace, up in the Ruhr Mountains, and runs to the north and empties into the Rhine River right here near Strasbourg. And this is where the Alsatians stayed. The Eel River is the river there, but in the Alsatian or in the Alemannic language, Eel is L. So they settled on the L River. A settler is a sasser, a person who sits, a sasser, a sitzer. So it became El Sasser. The people became known as Alsatian. The people who sat on or settled the L River, settled on the L River. And then, of course, as time went on, the area itself was called Alsace. And it's a very fertile area. It's bordered by the Rhine River on the east and the Vosges Mountains on the west. Very fertile area. This is the hills here. So this is Upper Alsace. The south is called Upper Alsace because this is the high area, the mountainous area, and the water runs from south to north. Not as here, we run from north to south. Anyway, these people settled there, and they were called Alsacians. Then the town, the community or the area became Alsace. We have the French to thank for the word Alsace. But it's Alsace. You go over there, these people don't say Alsace. These people say Alsace. Okay? And then the ancient Alemannic language became known as Alsatian. And the Alsatian language, the Alemannic language, is the basis for what is known now as German, the German dialect. They talk about High German and Low German, as though it was something, a better German or less German. High German means it's from the mountains, Low German means it's from the flatlands. That's all it does. Okay, after the Romans came King Clovis, and the Franks conquered it. He had recently converted to Christianity, and so he converted the kingdom of Alsace into Christianity. Now, at that time, when the Catholic Church didn't exist as a Catholic Church, it was the Christian Church. It was before the Reformation. Yes, thank you. After him, and I'm going to try to condense it, Charlemagne came along and he united France, Germany, and Alsace. Now, he was a German speaker. Old Charlie was quite a character. It is said that every European is descended from King Charlemagne. He was the king of the Holy Roman Empire. How many of you have traced your ancestry to Charlemagne? You haven't? Well, our daughter back there, Pamela, where are you, Pam? There you go. She traced it back. She traced the Schurhart family back to Alsace, back to Charlemagne. How many of you have Schurhart blood running through your veins? Okay, don't get too excited. The some of the things Charlemagne weren't too good. First of all, Charlemagne had at least 4 wives and at least 18 concubines. And from that he had, they say, more than 18 children. 4 of those 18 children were legitimate. Where do we come from? Are we so happy about it? We don't know which ones we came from, do we? He also was in good standing with the Pope because he went out and conquered these people, brought them into the Christian church. So the Pope thought Charlemagne was really a great guy because he conquered these people and brought them into church. But his methods were a little bit questionable. Charlemagne gave his people who he conquered a choice. Join the Christian church or you're gone. And what would you have done? You joined the Christian church. He was even canonized as a saint by an anti-pope. Anti-pope, I think his name was, I don't know what his name was. Whatever his name was. Well, some anti-pope canonized him as a saint. But then later on, the Catholic Church, after it became known as the Catholic Church, said this was not legal. He was not a Catholic. He was not a saint at all. Oh, his name was Pascal III. That's what. Okay? There was always turmoil in Alsace. There was fighting. There was always the Germanic-speaking language. The Germanic-speaking people were fighting against the French-speaking people. And they all clashed in Alsace. They went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. Is any wonder why they were called the Guminaka? What's a Guminaka?
Rubberneck.
A rubberneck. Because they went back and forth so many times. They were called Guminaka. And I know, Kent, it's Guminecken in German, but we're going to talk about Guminaka here. Okay? There's always political and religious turmoil in the area. There was the French Revolution, Protestant Reformation, and many, many wars, of which one, the 30 Years' War, decimated most of the Alsatian men. The 30 Years' War lasted from 1618 to 1648. It is said that after the 30 Years' War, there were very few men left in Alsace. There was women left in Alsace. But there was an archbishop in Alsace and one in Switzerland that got together, and this Alsatian says, hey, we don't have any men. And this Swiss bishop said, we have lots of men, we'll send you some men over there. It sound like a breeding farm or something. Anyway, they sent the men over there, and a lot of these names that the Alsatians have now came from the Swiss. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to the area of Switzerland, the Alsatian border. If you speak to them, they speak exactly the way our folks here spoke when I was growing up. And also the Amish. I've spoken to the Amish people up in Pennsylvania, and their dialect is exactly the way the Alsatian dialect is. Of course, they came from Switzerland and Alsace, didn't they? Okay, it became obvious during this time that there was a need for a common language, so they could convert with each other and also to do commerce. So they invented, and they didn't invent it overnight, but they invented a language called Standard German. Standard German was not standardized until 1901, the year 1901. So it's a much younger language than the Alsatian language or any of those other dialects. Now there was a grammatical book written in in 1880 by a Duden, and it's called the Duden Handbook, and that was that, and it was used, and it was declared, that became declared as the standard German in 1901. Now, Martin Luther, back in 1552, translated his German Bible into the Saxon language. He did not translate it into the High German language because it did not exist. He was a Saxon. Okay, so that was his part of it. Okay. Population. The population of Alsace boomed during the Middle Ages. It just grew and grew and grew and grew to the point that they were overpopulated. They had been through wars. They were overpopulated. They didn't have work. The people were starving. They had a famine, a big famine. And in the 1840s, they decided they needed to do something. And that leads up to Bill Terry Shearhart. He's going to tell us about the Alsace coming to Castroville.
Thank you, Ray. Yeah, I'm going to trade with Les. Take Bill's chair. Go ahead.
You can sit by her.
Anybody need a quick break? You all think I talk long?
Two lawyers.
I'm gonna turn it over to. If nobody needs a break, we're gonna move right into Bill. This is really, it's wonderful. I've heard his presentation. It's very fascinating.
Thank you. Most of you know me. My name is Bill Shearhart, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history and the migration years and Henry Castro. But before I get there, I just want to tell you, of course, as Mark mentioned, I've told him I'm not qualified to be an instructor or a teacher. I cannot speak it. I've got a few words and phrases over the years. And before I move into my topic proper, I want to just teach you 2 brief phrases that you can keep with you and that will always protect you from whatever is going on in this class or elsewhere when you're trying to speak Alsatian. The first one, 3 words. Ich weiß nicht. It means I don't know, or I know nothing. I do not know. I weiß no nicht. Nothing. So if somebody's asking you a question and you just ich weiß nicht, and they'll, that'll help you. Second one, it all seems to go too fast when you're trying to learn. That's what it is for me. So here you go. Nicht so schnell. Nicht so schnell. Not so fast, not so quick. I need it slower. So those are the 2 you can sink your teeth in tonight and take home with you. Ich weiß nicht so schnell. Okay, so please forgive me. There's no way I can stand in front of a group of people that want to learn Alsatian without mentioning my grandpa and my grandma Shearhart. They put that dictionary together along with my Aunt Connie Reen. She was Reen at the time. She remarried when her husband passed away. You know her as Connie Balmas. She's passed away also now. And her oldest daughter, Kathy, my first cousin, Kathy Reen. I can remember when I was a little boy, and it was big news around my family. Well, Grandma and Grandpa and Aunt Connie and Kathy, they're putting this dictionary together, and like Mark said, on the typewriter. I can remember Kathy, my cousin, just typing and typing and typing on the typewriter back then. And this is what it turned into eventually here, this dictionary that we're all going to rely on probably for the rest of their lives and for the rest of our lives. And I tell you, there can't be any prouder people up in heaven looking down right now than those folks. So what I have to do is take 2 minutes to read to you the obituary that was published in the newspaper over in Alsace when my grandpa died, okay, and he died back in 1993. Forgive me if my voice cracks a little bit. I might shed a little bit of tear here when I read this to you, but I've got to do it. Because like Mark said, I'm not here of any merit of my own, only because they were the giants in the beginning. All right, so this was published in Alsatian in the newspaper over there when he died. So these are their words speaking about, about my grandpa Blackie. He was the Texan with the most Alsatian feeling, the American who had the most friends in the hot Rhine. Therefore, it is with great sadness that those friends will learn of the death of the one they only called Blackie, who was Ralph Shearhart, for the civil status. He died on Friday in a hospital in San Antonio, Texas. He was 86 years old. In 1975, he was, in the U.S., one of the pioneers and the kingpin of the exchanges between Castroville and Alsace. Blackie worshipped the birthplace of his grandparents, who left Alsace, as many Alsatians, in the year 1840 to go to the promiseful world. The Alsatian community, created in Castroville by the Alsatian migrants, loses in Blackie a tireless leader. He did a lot of things during his professional life: commerce, horse breeding, creation of a fireman association in Castroville, and since his retirement, he only worked to perpetuate our traditions in the faraway little Alsace of Texas. With his wife, Annette, who died 3 years ago, Blackie even signed an English Alsatian dictionary. The success of the first edition, 800 words, that's this one right here, that's the original, was so important that he wrote a second book with 3,500 words. That's this white one that we're going to be talking about. The facility of Blackie to speak the dialect of the Sangao astonished all the ones who met him at several circumstances during his trips in Hot Rhine. This dialect he maintained with his friends and family. His friends Clinton, that's Clinton Berquin, Charlie, that's Charlie Cease, from Egersheim to Soplehut, the village where the family of Ralph Shearhart comes from. And many people of the Hot Rhine will have a lot to think of him and this little Alsace that is today in sorrow. And so I was so proud of that. I had it translated and framed, and of course it's a family treasure that'll hang on our wall forever. But
Bill, didn't your grandfather sing a song about the Sangao?
He could sing a song. He could recite a poem. I regret now that I didn't hang on to all of that when I was younger, but
you didn't record the song?
no, I can't say that that song ever got recorded, but I can remember him singing it, yes. And so, anyway, hats off to him and my grandma, my aunt, my cousin for laying that cornerstone for us, and hopefully we can keep some of that alive and rejuvenate some of that. So the main thing I want to talk to you about tonight is the story of how it all began and how it came to be. And to know the history of Castroville, you've got to know the history of Henry Castro and his life, and how his life came to intersect with this group of Alsatians and with this region of Texas. Now, to know about Henry Castro, you got to know a little bit about the history of Texas. To know a little bit about the history of Texas, you got to know a little bit about the history of Mexico to know a little bit about the history of Mexico, you've got to know a little bit about the history of Spain. And that's far enough back, we can start there. And we'll quickly get to the point. But if you'll recall your Western Hemisphere history, okay, Spain in the 1700s and the conquistadors and the explorers came over and they conquered and settled South America, Central America, Mexico, up into the Texas region, New Mexico, Arizona, California. That's the first flag out on this town square. That's Spain. That's our first of the 6 Texas flags. Now, Spain, to try to settle the area, they brought along the missionary priests, the Jesuit priests from Spain, who were so famous for their mission worldwide, bringing Christianity and civilization to the Western Hemisphere. And of course, they built their missions and their forts in San Antonio, and all of that great history is there in the museums, in the missions, the Alamo, Espada, all of the beautiful church missions. All of these were fortresses and forts during the Spanish decades and centuries, okay? Now, eventually, you know that in the early 1800s, the Mexicans, in Mexico, they had their revolution and they overthrew the Spanish reign, and then all of our region became under the control of Mexico. Okay, that's early 1800s. Now, when Mexico took over all of these lands, of course, these lands weren't populated with Mexican citizens. So what they did is they instituted this system called the impresario system, where the government of Mexico was looking for someone who could populate the areas of Texas, and they came up with this system whereby they would give a large land grant to someone who could bring migrants in and settle the land. And of course there were conditions on these land grants. The people that came in had to satisfy certain conditions. They had to swear an allegiance to the government of Mexico, etc., etc. There's all these, conditions, which make sense. Come in, we're going to give you the land, you settle the land, you be citizens of our country, and here's the rules you have to follow. So now, what happens is, you'll recognize this name, the biggest and most famous impresario under this system that made a deal with the government of Mexico, his name was Stephen F. Austin. So what did he do over the course of many years? He brought in the Anglo settlers and started settling certain parts of Texas. And over time, then all of these new migrants that he brought in outnumbered all of the Spanish citizenry that was in the area. I think I read the statistic was 3 or 4 to 1, and eventually guess what happens? Well, these people that came to be known as the Texans said, we don't like these conditions, we don't want to do it your way, we want to do it our way, and thus you have the Texas Revolution. Now you all know that history, Battle of the Alamo, San Jacinto, the defeat of Santa Anna, and now guess what? We've got the nation of Texas, all right? Not the state of Texas, the nation of Texas, and that happened in 1836. Texas becomes its own country. Okay, so now what does Texas have? A whole lot of land and very few people. Hardly any of the land is populated. They've got no money, the government. They've got no standing army. Thus evolved the Texas Rangers for law enforcement in the area, but all the territory west and around San Antonio is Indian occupied. The Mexican government never really conceded defeat, and they didn't recognize the Rio Grande as the border, so you still have Mexican troops threatening from the south and the west. You've got Indians everywhere. Again, the government of Texas was saying, well, what do we do? Well, they adopted that impresario system that first brought them in to the area, all of the Texans, and they were looking for men of the stature of as Stephen F. Austin was, to try to bring in other migrants and settle the areas. And these land grants is what the Texas government at that time was offering to people that were qualified to do it. Now, who are the people that are qualified to do it? Very few. I mean, can you imagine what it would have taken to make a deal with the state of Texas at that time, and what you would have had to have done? But we got a shift now, and we've got to focus on how this man comes into the picture. All right, he was born in the late 1700s in the southwestern part of France. He is a Jewish man of Portuguese descent. His family migrated from Portugal to France in the, must have been the 1600s, I believe, when the Spanish Inquisition was going on. Anyway, he grows up in the late 1700s and early 1800s in France. His family is aristocratic. What that means is they have wealth and stature. Okay, so he was born into a well-to-do family. Now, as he's growing up, he becomes, that's in the Napoleonic years, and he serves for a while in the Parisian Guard, which is some type of a unit in Napoleon's army. All right, so he then marries a widow from Italy, and she has children, and he takes those children in, and they become a family unit. Now those children you might recognize, and his wife, you might recognize some of these names. Amelia was his wife, Amelia Street. Lorenzo was one of his sons, Lorenzo Street. Fiorella was his daughter, Fiorella Street. So, you know, that's where you get some of these street names around here from him, from his family members. In any event, okay, now, when he marries his wife, who is from Italy, somehow, some way, her connections make him become in contact with the Kingdom of Naples. I believe that's at that time Naples wasn't maybe part of Italy officially. They were their own little kingdom island, and they appointed him to be their ambassador, and they asked him to go to the United States, to the port of Providence, Rhode Island, and be their consul general there, overseeing, I guess they were doing importing and trade and commerce with the state of Rhode Island through that port. So that's how Castro first came to the United States. Now he might have gone back and forth there on the ships, but anyway, that's how he first came to the United States, and he quickly applied for and received U.S. citizenship. Now, we're talking, you know, early to mid, getting to the mid-1800s here. What happened to him after that, he became, you know, he was a world businessman, a financier. He was also a high-level official in a company called Lafitte and Company. Lafitte and Company was from France, but they had a big presence in New Orleans and Louisiana. Okay, so with Lafitte and Company and with his ambassadorship with the Kingdom of Naples, he stayed up in the northeastern United States for many years, making contacts and doing business up there. And through his connections, at one point in time, he tried to help the state of Texas over in France get a loan, because Texas was looking for money, okay, to finance their government operations, and they were wanting to pledge land as collateral, etc. Well, Castro first worked to try to secure a loan on behalf of the state of Texas over in his home country of France. And that's how the Texas government came to know his name. Later on in time, Castro, knowing what was going on around the world, being a kind of a worldly traveler and financier, he heard about the impresario contracts that were being offered by the state of Texas, and he thought he was well qualified, and he took a stab at this. Now, when I say took a stab at this, he traveled down to New Orleans and then came over to visit with Sam Houston at Washington on the Brazos. This is again back in the early Texas years, and he sits down and negotiates, and the state of Texas believes he's a man of the caliber that can get the job done, so they go ahead and they approve a land grant with him. And the land grant had the following requirements. Let me read them to you. Castro was to introduce a colony of 600 families or single men over the age of 17 years within 3 years of the date of the contract that he made with the state of Texas. Each family was to be granted 640 acres of land to be located as nearly in a square as possible, and each single man 320 acres. Colonists would receive full title only when they had built a good and comfortable cabin upon it and kept under the cultivation at least 15 acres. Castro would be entitled in recompense for his labors and expenditures to 10 sections of land for every 100 families, and in the same ratio of half sections for every 100 single men. The Republic of Texas contracted to give each settlement of 100 families one section of 640 acres to be used in the erection of churches. Unless Castro introduced 1/3 of the whole number within 1 year after the date of the contract, he would be forced to forfeit his contract, which would not, however, prejudice the rights of the settlers already established. The term family would be used to mean a man and his wife and children, a widower and 2 or more children, or a widow and 2 or more children. Castro was prohibited from introducing an immigrant who had been guilty of an atrocious crime or who had been of bad moral character. All immigrants were prohibited from selling to Indians any spirituous liquors, powder, or firearms under pain or forfeiture of their grave. Castro was granted the right to introduce an additional 400 families provided he gave notice to that effect within 1 year from the date of the contract, and the contract provided for an extension of 6 months over and above the time of 1 year given for the introduction of the 1/3 of the whole number of families. So that was his initial contract with the state of Texas. Okay. The contract was given to him, and it constituted in this area here was over 2 million acres of land that was going to be in his grant. Do we have one of those maps up here? There we go. Okay, so you'll see here, here's San Antonio, here's the Castro grant. Now, over the period of 2 or 3 years when the state of Texas was offering these grant contracts, this is how many they put out. This is how many they contracted. You see, Castro had 2. His name was down here. And you'll see what the state of Texas was trying to do. Okay, you've got some towns in Texas. Houston would be over here, Galveston. All right. So Texas is trying to populate its frontier, all right, because down here by the Rio Grande is where the threat from the Mexican troops were. Over here, again, still Mexican troop threat, but this is the Indian frontier over here, and all of this too. Up here you've got a river there along here. But you see the names on here, you can count them. There's maybe a half a dozen names there. That's it. And this is all the men from around the world that had the ability and the and basically the drive to want to enter into this type of an agreement with the state of Texas. Very few people could have done it, in other words. And as the story plays out, you'll see very few did. In fact, there'll only be one name left on the list at the end of the story, and that's Henry Castro. And none of these down here even got close to being done. And And a couple of towns sprung from these up here, New Braunfels, Fredericksburg, but none of the grants got done in the end except Henry Castro's. And his only got done to the degree of about 1/5 of the entire grant. And I'll tell you why. All right? And the why comes in the story of Henry Castro and his life and what he did. So after he makes this contract with the state of Texas, you can't imagine what his list of things to do might have been. But every single thing on his list of things to do entailed money going out. Okay, he was a wealthy man at the time. We don't know how wealthy, but obviously he was a wealthy man. But every single day, every single step he took for the next maybe 6 to 8 years of his life was all money that he was paying out and not a penny coming in. And he dropped everything else that he ever had done and everything else he was doing to focus on this right here. And his dream was big, and if his dream was ever realized, it would have been, he would have had land bigger than some of the small nations over in Europe if it would have all played out. And he did anticipate that it was all going to play out. He anticipated not bringing a few hundred families. He anticipated eventually bringing thousands and thousands and thousands of settlers. He wanted this land. He wanted this land. And his plan was that he was going to spend everything he had to and do everything he had to, and then in the end, it was all going to just come to fruition for him. Now, it didn't quite work out that way, as the story goes, but what did he do after he entered into this contract with the state of Texas? Well, first thing he's got to do, he's got to sail back to France, and he's got to start recruiting. Now, what would that entail? Advertising costs, brochures, publications, contracts, recruiting. He's got to have agents to help him. So he set upon that mission, and he did have some success, and he was recruiting not just in Alsace, he was recruiting all over France. It just turned out over time that the most response that he got for people wanting to travel to the New World was from Alsace. And so, you know, maybe 90% of his colonists came from Alsace, but he recruited all over France. In any event, for a year or so, he went back to France and set about his recruiting. Now, once he found people that were willing, he had to charter ships. And he had to put them on the ships, and he had to pay for that, and he had to pay for the people, pay for their food. He had to, one of the first things he did is he found himself an agent and a small partner to come into this plan with him. His name was Louis Huth. He was a German, and he and his father entered into an agreement with Castro that they would get a certain amount of acres, they'd put up a certain amount of money, but Louis Huth would come on the first ship and he would be the agent over here in Texas to help the people get to the land grant. Okay, let's look at some of those ships. There we go. This is the first one that sailed. Okay, the Ebro. Now, how long was that trip and how dangerous was that trip? Well, if they did well, I'm told, and I've read 2 months was the journey over from France to Texas. What would they do? They would land in Galveston. From Galveston, then what laid ahead of them? Okay, unfortunately for them, a 2-week walk on a, you know, with some mules and covered wagons, trying to make it to San Antonio. And then what did they find when they got to San Antonio? Absolutely nothing. Okay, so they were starving, they were tired, they were, you know, there were sickness and disease. They didn't have anybody, they didn't have a job, they had nothing. And so he's over there in France sending these people over on these ships, and they're coming over here thinking, well, you know, when I get here, there's going to be a farm. Somebody's going to hand me a shovel, and I'm going to get a plow and a mule, and we're going to build a little house, and then, you know, we're going to have our land. And of course, it wasn't working out that way. So, Castro knows, of course, he's got to come over here, and eventually he does get on a ship and he sails over here to, back to Galveston. And when he gets here, we're talking 1843, 44 now. When he gets here, when he arrives, you know, everybody's ready to hang him. You know, nobody is there to greet him. Everybody's angry with him because of all the hardships they've had to endure and all the pain and suffering they've been through. But Henry Castro is he is very driven and very motivated. He gets over here. What does he do? What do you need? He starts spending his money. Okay, you need food here. Here's money. You need we need to get provisions together. He makes it. He gathers some of the people that are still willing and able and waiting for him, and he makes his way to San Antonio. And he's in San Antonio, and he starts rounding up volunteers, and not volunteers really, he's paying the people getting together to make his trip. Remember, at this point in time, he's never laid eyes on any of the land in his grant. He's never traveled out here. He's in San Antonio. He gets his group together, and all his provisions, food, tools, timber, the livestock, the horses, everything. And he says to himself and to everybody, you know, we've got to go, and we've got to get this done. As compared to, you know, some of these other men that you saw in that name grant, they're just financiers. They're trying to find somebody to pay them to go. That's why none of the others ever came to fruition. But Castro took it upon himself to say, no, I'm going to make this happen. And so that's why he's here in person. In fact, a little tangent, he's communicating, you know, as best they could through messages and mail and everything. So when he's hearing that some of the colonists, he's still in France, when he's hearing the hardships of the colonists and what's going on, he's reaching out to the state of Texas, to the government, asking the officials to help his colonists that he's sending over, the immigrants. State of Texas is telling him, we're not in a position to help you. This is your contract. You've got to fulfill your term. We don't have an army. We don't have any money. We can't do anything for you and your people. You're on your own. In fact, so much so that when he was on the journey over here, I read an exchange between him and Stephen F. Austin, where Stephen F. Austin tells Castro, you know what, you ought not go out to your land grant lands, because if you take the people out there, y'all are just you're gonna die. There's nothing out there. We can't provide you any security. There's Indians, there's Mexican troops, Mexican raids. There's, you know, water sources are sparse. We don't know what you're gonna do when you get out there, but I'm sorry, sir, we can't help you. He suggested an alternative plan, which was, Mr. Castro, why don't you go ahead and buy some property closer to San Antonio so you can use that as a stepping stool to eventually get settlers out to the land grant that you have under contract. And Castro, guess what? He didn't have any choice. He had to do it. He spent more money to buy all of the property, well, property we're standing on here, ultimately became Castroville, and he made smaller contracts with the colonists. You probably heard of some of these 40-acre tracts around Castroville that were part of his deal. He bought this land so that he would have some place to utilize and to form a settlement that could continue to help him realize his fuller dream of the bigger land grant. So anyway, now we're at the point where he's back here in San Antonio, and he's spent the money again and hired the people and got the colonists that are over here and still waiting and willing. And they make a wagon train and they come to Castroville. It takes them 2 days. The weather is so bad. The rain is so bad between San Antonio and Castroville in their wagon train to make it. But nevertheless, they made it. He found a spot just this side of the Medina River. which is probably right here where we're standing, stuck a shovel in the ground and said, this is it. They started clearing brush. They worked a few days. They had a few huts up. They worked a few weeks. They had a few houses up. They brought a surveyor with them. They mapped out the town, and they named it Castroville. Okay? And so in those first few months, they were able to get the place stable and safe, to where then Castro went back to San Antonio. He brought some Bexar County officials out, the county judge, the county surveyor came out, a couple of other county officials from there, and they liked it so much they put their names on a couple of lots, City Castroville lots. And then Castro, being the smart businessman that he was, I think he'd already lined it up. He had talked to the bishop in New Orleans, Bishop Odine, who was actually out of Galveston. But the bishop came over, visited Castroville, blessed the first cornerstone of the St. Louis Church right over here, about 2 blocks away from us. So Castro is doing all these things, collecting affidavits and maps and things from all these important men, and he gets a stepping stone, the little town of Castroville, in place to where he can now keep his dream alive, and he's got to get back on the ship now and go back to France and continue his recruiting and continue to pay people, agents, ships, provisions, and of course he's finding problems at every juncture. My main source that I'm going from here is, I've got to cite the source. This was a dissertation done in 1984 by a student at Texas Tech University by the name of Bobby Weaver. It's 230 pages of detailed accounts of all of Castro's activities in all of those impresario years, which were 1842 to about 1850. It's on the internet if you want to find it and read it. Please do. Every page, as I'm reading this, if I didn't know any better, I'm thinking the next page that I turn is going to say, and Castro finally gave up, and he died on the ship, or he ran out of money, and none of this ever happened, none of it went any further. It is an absolute miracle that this man did what he did, and came to plant that flag, that first shovel in this town, that this town ever came into existence, because again, none of those other grants that we see on the screen there ever came to fruition. But nevertheless, Castro now, in the chronology here, is sailing back on the ship to France to try to continue his recruiting and continue to send people over so that more people can come to Galveston, to San Antonio, to Castroville, and then from Castroville on. Also on this next trip, he plans to gather up all his family members and bring them back, because at this point, he's all in. He's got nothing else that he can do in his life other than try to realize this dream he's working on. So anyway, the problems don't stop. He arrives back in France to all kinds of problems. The mayors of the towns and the regions over there in France from which Castro is recruiting absolutely have made him into a villain. Some of the tragedies that are taking place in early Texas and some of these trips from these migrants have been reported by mail from some of the people that have traveled over here. There were a couple of Indian deaths due to Indian raids, a death of a young infant due to disease and sickness, and of course all of the hardships that they're enduring just from the trip itself. So, and he's taking some of the people away, the population away from some of the townships that he's recruiting from, and so the officials over there are completely against him. He goes over there and he finds that there were 2 lawsuits filed against him where he lost in abstention. He wasn't there, basically claiming that he was just participating in fraudulent business activities and cheating all these people out of their, out of their boat fare that he was collecting from them, a small fee, but that he was taking people over there basically just to die of any one of these elements, any one of these hardships that could come, that would befall them. And now he's going over there, he's got all of his evidence from Bishop Oden, from the Bexar County officials. He's got all these affidavits and all these stories, all these great things about what he's done in the formation of Castroville. He goes over there, he has to get legal counsel. He files suits to try to appeal and undo, and he wins in court. It takes him a few months, but he cleans up his reputation, he cleans up his name over there, and guess what? More money going out for that endeavor, more money going out on his recruiting. Now, by this time, he's focusing almost strictly on Alsace-Lorraine, Alsace and Lorraine region, because that's the region from that he's been getting most response. So anyway, he keeps on his efforts. Okay, another year or so goes by. Now he's missing these deadlines here. He appeals to the state of Texas. They give him an extension. He finally gets his family together and he gets on one of the ships and he sails over to come back. All right, now, when he comes back, sorry, I got to rewind. Before he comes back, the other thing he needed to do when he went over there, because he was running out of his family fortune at the time, he's got to find another investor to get in on the deal with him, or else he's not going to be able to continue. And he finds a group of investors. They were Belgians investors, and they liked his plan. They infused money into it, but they bought the vast majority of the share of his land contract from him. And so Castro, then by the time he was coming back, he had enough money now, he thought, to make it work, but he was only going to have a relatively small portion of the grant at this time, because the partners that paid money into it at this juncture were going to get most of it. One of these Belgian investors, you might recognize this name, the president of the company that invested in Castro's project at that time, his last name was De Hennis. So that's how that name filtered through Castro's project and eventually ended up being the town of De Hennis. He was named after that man. That man never came over here. He was just the chief investor in that group, and Castro wanted to show him a gesture of goodwill. That's how that town got its name. Okay. Now, Castro's coming back. He's got his family with him. He makes his way again from Galveston on to San Antonio and back to Castroville, and still not a single land grant has been given by the state of Texas, although some of the people now have taken their spots on some of the lands, and eventually this is what it turned into right there. This is the ultimate final portion of Castro's grant where deeds were actually given by the state of Texas under Castro's original grant. And here's the outline of the whole grant, the 2.3 million acres or so. There were, I don't know if this turned out 20, 30,000 acres eventually granted out. It took several years though, because the state of Texas just wasn't at anybody's beck and call. State of Texas is still having its difficulties, fighting its own battles. By the way, the state of Texas is now part of the United States at this time, and but this is still the western frontier here, south and west. So Texas is still not, populated, so to speak, as we know it. And what happened here is, over the course of years, the land office finally came in and started issuing deeds here, okay? And Castro ended up owning many, many thousands of acres. But the problem was, the part of his dream that never came to fruition was that the land really never, in his lifetime, became worth anything. What happened around this time, he comes back to Texas, all right, He makes his way back to Castroville eventually with his family, and not too long after that, he's sued by the group of investors that infused money into the program back when he was in France, the Belgian investors, because Castro was supposed to make payments back to them, and he couldn't ever do it because he couldn't ever raise enough money. It took Texas 3 or 4 or 5 more years to issue the land grants, and so eventually his partner sued him, and he lost. And he lost. They had a big judgment against him for $20,000 roughly. Back then, who knows what that would be in modern day terms. But a lot of this land that he got, he had to start selling it. He had to auction it off to raise the funds to pay back that legal judgment that was against him. He did all of that. He still was left with quite a few acres of land. But the land was so worthless at the time that some of the people, he would buy back their grant from them for somewhere between 2 and 5 cents an acre. And some of the people even some of the people came over and they didn't even want to take part of it anymore. They might find a job where they can live a decent life and put food on the table in San Antonio or back in Galveston or Houston or some town in between. So it was just a matter of survival to all of these people at this time. And the land never, during Castro's lifetime, had any real monetary value. And that's where his dream just never came to fruition. But when you look at the whole story, I'm just giving you a 25-minute summary here. You could read the whole story in detail. What it tells you is this man put everything he had into this project. Ultimately, he went broke doing it. He had just enough after he was all done to have the acreage to, rent out for a farm here, a farm there. He had a house and some lots here in Castroville, and that's it. He lived a modest life after it was all said and done. In the end, he shared no common roots with the Alsatians that settled here. He didn't share their religion. He didn't share their culture. He didn't share their language. Eventually, his son ended up living and working down in Monterrey, Mexico. Castro eventually, at his later years, decided he was going to go back to France. He went down to Monterrey, Mexico on the way to visit his son, and he died there in Monterrey, Mexico, and that's where he's buried. All right? So that's the life of Henry Castro. But the one thing that the man accomplished, all right, is he allowed at least the part of his dream, this town of Castroville, Texas, to come into existence, to bring our ancestors over here and give us this town and this life that we know today. So we have to give him credit for that, even though he didn't become the land baron that he always dreamed of becoming. Now, in retrospect in history, the state of Texas does recognize him. After he dies, the state of Texas eventually names a county in North Texas after Castro. There's a Castro County up near Lubbock. But really, the bigger picture is there is no other slice of history that contains this story. In these few years between 1836, when Texas became a nation, and about 1850, after Castro's work was complete, or he had exhausted all his work, there are no other stories like this. And you look at the great impresarios, the history of Texas, well, Stephen F. Austin, yes, and you know who the next one is behind him? It's Henry Castro. He really is a great historical figure, even though in his lifetime, nothing ever became of it for him. He basically lost all of his family fortune, and the remnant of it is what we are today, this little pocket of Alsatian culture in this little town of Castroville. And you know, once you dive into it and you read it, it makes you want to hold on to it. And so that's why I appreciate what Mark has done here and all of these people that he has named, because it's given us the opportunity to appreciate the language and the culture and the recipes and the religion and the traditions and everything that's here in Castroville, Texas, because, hey, show me another town where all of that exists, and show me another town with this kind of a story and this kind of a history. I just don't think you're going to find many. So it's a very unique thing, and you've got to tip your hat to Henry Castro and to all of the people that have tried to preserve and pass on the traditions and the legacy of Castroville, Texas. So I'm very honored and humbled to play a little part in this, and I will get those dictionaries printed for each and every one of you that wants one. They should be here in about 2 weeks, and I'm also probably going to put some t-shirts together. If anybody's interested in that, we'll get you to sign up for that later on. And with that, I hope you hadn't fallen asleep yet. I think Bradford's got a few more minutes for you.
Well, what we're going to do, folks, thank you, Bill. I'm sorry, my fault, we ran way over tonight. So what we're going to do, Bradford has graciously offered to present his at the beginning of the next class. We're not going to cut Kent's time. We're just going to run a little over next time too, so we can get everything in. But I see some heavy eyelids, and I know we got folks, y'all got jobs. We need to get you out of here. So thank you for your patience, and hopefully we'll see y'all next week, same time, same place. Yes. Les had something he needed to say real quick.
Yeah, I forgot all about this. How many of you know Jacqueline Diver from Eggesheim? Oh my God, I've got a job. She called twice on Saturday, and she called once on Sunday, and she said, if alle we can, a große schmooze. Come on, line up, I can kiss every one of you.